Gosh, this is not the message for today, but there is a good message in there about the people in Minneapolis that showed up, right? And were bold, and we're defending people that were getting bullied, and we're standing up for those in boldness. I think that Scripture can speak to us in a different way as we sit here for a moment and recognize that. Heavy. Okay, so here at Holy Covenant, we like to start with a little discussion question, so a chance for you to turn to your neighbors and connect and chat a little bit. And today's discussion question is, where in your life have you noticed that consistency mattered more than motivation? So any areas where showing up was 3/4 of the battle. So just turn to those around you, kind of chat. If there's something else you want to chat about, that's fine too. Okay, the back of the class is getting a little turned up, so I think we need. I think we could pivot. Was there any good responses from the room? Someone in the back mentioned that sometimes consistency to stop doing things, right? Like consistently choosing not to vape, which is something I'm not succeeding at right now, but. Someone said, oh yeah, the consistency not to eat ice cream while I'm on a diet, like that's also something that I'm not going to get a passing score on. So many of us during the pandemic kind of picked up some new habits, some new routines, some new ways of doing things. And just before the pandemic, I'd started like eating better and going to the gym. And so when the gyms closed down, I actually kind of faced I'm not going to give up on this. So I decided to start running, which most of you know, this super fit guy standing in front of you. That was a joke. But, most of you know a person that generally tries to take care of their health. But in 2020, that most certainly was not me. So I decided to take up running. So I talked to a friend of mine who does ultra marathons, and I asked her for advice on how to become a runner, right? And I assumed she'd talk about speed or mileage, maybe send me to a good training plan, something a little more complicated, and she didn't. What she told me is running is all about consistency. It's not how fast you run, it's not how far you run, just consistency, showing up. And me, being the person that I am, has a tendency to take things to the extreme, so I started running every single day. A mile a day, every day. There's a picture of me. It's a little bit different than the one you saw last night, Hannah. That's me after my first marathon. It was the Bass Pro Marathon, so they had some taxidermy at the finish line. And that's Southern Missouri for you. So at first I said, like any good habit, we've all heard, or if you haven't, that it takes 21 days to establish a good habit, right? So I said, I'm going to run a mile a day for 21 days. Like that's kind of what I had committed to myself, just to start it. Then I was like, oh, I did 21, I can go to 30, and 30 became 50, and 50 became 100, and eventually on day 366, I forced myself to take a day off. Some days I ran whenever I wasn't feeling my best, or if I was a little tired, or maybe I was just annoyed by the fact that I had to run in weather like this, and I also started by running whenever I could squeeze in a good run. But after a few late night runs, I realized something had to change. So I started running every single morning at the exact same time before anything else could interfere. Not because it was the inspiring time to run, which it kind of is, like that 5 a.m. run is next level, but because it was consistent, and it was the way I could maintain my consistency. And by the picture behind me, that consistency led to 2 marathons and 2 ultra marathons in just over a year. And it's not because I was exceptionally gifted. And it most certainly wasn't because I loved running. You could probably see me running and see the look on my face. But consistency kept me moving forward when my motivation began to disappear. And when I stopped running consistently, everything kind of fell apart. Like I skipped one day, and then it became 2, and then 2 days a week became skipping just a few times just a month, and it kept growing. And after about 6 months, I wasn't running at all. It was the same body, the same legs, just a different practice. And that's when it hit me that growth doesn't come from intensity. It comes from rhythm. And that's not only true physically, but it's also true for our spiritual lives, and it's also true for our life as a community. One of the quiet assumptions that many of us carry about faith is that we show up when we need something. When life's falling apart, when we're overwhelmed, when grief, fear, or uncertainty finally pushes us through the doors. Today, on this icy, snowy day, I imagine this message is a little bit preaching to the choir. Y'all are the dedicated ones that show up no matter what, and our folks online. And to be clear, we still show up and bring our pain and vulnerability. Those moments are what brought us here in the first place, and those prayers matter, and God meets us in crisis. But many of us struggle to see the need of community when things are going well or when life feels just a little bit mundane. Scripture is full of people crying out from the depths, but if the only time we show up is when we're desperate, we don't actually form a community, we form an emergency room or an emergency response system. And emergency responses are vital, but they aren't where life is sustained. The book of Hebrews speaks directly into this when it says, "Let us consider how we provoke one another to love and good deeds." We do this by not neglecting to meet together as if the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. There doesn't come a time when we stop needing to show up for each other. Notice the writer doesn't say, meet together when it's exciting. It doesn't say meet together when you're spiritually on fire. It doesn't say meet together only when you're struggling. The writer of Hebrews says something simple: don't neglect it. Because something forms in us when we keep showing up together, especially when it feels ordinary. Elaine Heath, a Methodist theologian and pastor, talks about this in her book, 5 Means of Grace, which you hear me talk about a lot because it's about 80 pages and it may be some of the best things for my spiritual life possible. So in this book, 5 Means of Grace, it's a little red book, and you can get it on thrift books for $4. In this book, she summarizes the ways in which John Wesley believed that God spoke to us the most clearly. She reminds us that grace isn't just something we receive privately or dramatically. Grace is something that shows up in between us. John Wesley called the showing up for one another Christian conferencing, which sounds pretty churchy, but the idea is actually very grounded. Christian conferencing is the belief that God shapes us through ongoing, honest relationship with other people who are also trying to follow Jesus. Not to fix one another, not to impress one another, not to perform holiness, but to be formed together. Elaine Heath says that faith matures not through spiritual heroics, but through staying in community with one another. Staying in conversation, staying in worship, staying in relationship when people disappoint us, staying when the novelty wears off. She argues for consistency over charisma and presence over polish. This is why the early church didn't just gather for teaching, but for shared meals and shared prayers as shared life. In Acts, it tells us they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. That's Acts 2. That word devoted doesn't mean enthusiastic all the time. It might actually mean the opposite. And for any of our married folks, right, they know that when you're devoted to your spouse, it most certainly means that you ride it out even when they leave the toilet seat up, right? It means they showed up even when the prayer sounded familiar, even when teaching challenged them, and even when the people around the table were complicated. And through that rhythm, something holy took shape. And here's the truth most of us don't want to admit. We don't drift away from community because we stop believing. We drift away because we get tired or bored or cynical or disillusioned or busy. We notice the flaws. We see the hypocrisy. We start thinking, I could do this on my own. And sometimes we can for a while. But over time, something subtle happens. We start to become less patient or less generous or less grounded. Not because we've done something wrong, but because faith was never meant to be practiced alone. Ecclesiastes puts it plainly when it says, 2 are better than 1, for if they fall, one will lift up the other. Notice it doesn't say if one person falls, it says when. Which means that the real question isn't whether we will need others, it's whether anyone will be around to pick us up when we do. At Holy Covenant, showing up isn't about keeping an institution alive. It's about keeping the community healthy. Healthy for those who don't know where to turn in times of transition, don't know where to reconcile their faith with Christian language used to justify hate and government-sponsored murders. Healthy to grieve multiple street assassinations carried out by the government. Healthy for a sanctuary for peace and a world dead set on violence. Your presence matters even when you feel tired, even when worship feels familiar, even when you don't expect a breakthrough, and maybe your presence matters especially then. Because someone else might be hanging on quietly, and your steady presence helps carry the weight. Paul reminds the church in Galatia, bear one another's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. You can't bear burdens from a distance. You have to be close enough to notice. So the invitation today isn't dramatic. Show up when you feel connected, and show up when you don't. Show up when faith feels alive, and show up when faith feels flat. Because Christian community isn't built on urgency, it's built on consistency.